have been hurt because they showed their emotions in a relationship with someone who didn't see the vulnerability as a strength. And what we need to encourage is just that point, that being vulnerable in and of itself is a major, major strength. You know, it's real easy for me to walk around here and tell you, yeah, Jeff, I got it all together, you know, all my bills are paid, I'm living large. But for me to sit down and tell you some of my deepest, darkest challenges, and especially my emotions, my hurts, that's when I'm showing a level of strength that most men, I guess, are uncomfortable getting to. Now, how do we change that?
Welcome to Just Men, a life-changing program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. The program that gives you information and inspiration for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining Just Men. On today's program, we have a very special guest. This is his first time being on Just Men. Please welcome Sedrik Newbern. Brother Sedrik, welcome to Just Men.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Man.
Excited to be here.
Wow, I tell you, the pleasure is all mine. I mean, on the onset, you add value to Just Men, and we're just thankful and grateful for you to impart wisdom inside of us, brother, and your experience. And so, I tell you, I want to hit the ground running deep.
Well, before you do that, though, can I just start off by saying there's no opportunity for me to impart wisdom without you doing what you do, brother. Wow. So thank you. That means a lot. It really does. We need more forums like this so people can come and get wisdom. So thank you for doing what you do.
Man, wow. Man, amen. Yeah. I like that.
Absolutely.
So, that's what kind of dialogue you and I are going to have, brother. We just,
exactly.
We're going to go at it. So let's just share a little bit about yourself and a quick bio on your life and just how you got to this point, man, and this point in life and so forth.
Okay. Well, you know, my story is an amazing story. It's unlike any other you've ever heard. Actually, I'm not telling the truth because I'm a kid that grew up without my father. Most African-American boys we know are growing up in homes where there's not a father present or an active father present. And in my case, my parents got married really young at Tennessee State University right after college. They moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and shortly after that I was born. And really 9 months after I was born, my dad was dropping my mom back off here in West Tennessee with her parents, and he was moving out to the West Coast to live. And so I spent the first 5 years of my life not knowing my dad, not really interacting with him because, you know, back in the 70s, it was expensive for the phone call, long distance phone calls and the flights. And then I got to know him, got to spend some time with him as I got older, and I was old enough to fly out by myself and visit. Had a great relationship with his parents, and in fact, my paternal grandfather was my hero, much like my maternal grandfather. So both my grandfathers were huge heroes for me. But I really wanted to get to know my dad because everywhere I went, especially growing up here in Nashville, I always heard, man, you look just like your dad. You're a little Pedro. You are your dad. And so as time went on, he and I really started to develop a relationship as best we could. And at age 18, I was the Christmas vacation for college, and I had gone out, and I knew at that point I'm a grown man. So I just wanted to sit down and just have some conversations with my dad because, as I said, the more I found out about him, the more I dug into his past and spent time around him, I realized, I was like, man, there's so much about me that I don't know, and I'm evolving into this guy, so let me figure out who he is. And so I can remember one night sitting down on the couch just talking to him, and I said, you know what, Dad, and it just came over me. I said, Dad, you know what, I can only imagine what life was like at age 24 when you had me and you were married to my mom in Washington, D.C. I said, I can only imagine what that was like. Because at that point, I'm 18. So, you know, I'm thinking 6 years older, I'm married with a kid in Washington, D.C., having grown up in West Tennessee. And I looked him in the eye, I said, Dad, you know what, I forgive you. I forgive you for not being there for me when I was growing up and missing out on all the things that I really wanted you to be a part of in my life. I forgive you for all of that. And he looked at me in that moment, and that's when I realized what forgiveness was, because he forgave himself. I literally watched 18 years of guilt be lifted off of my dad's shoulders in that conversation. And to this day, I mean, I kid you not, he called me yesterday, I believe it was, saying, man, I ain't talked to you in a while. I need to hear your voice. So he and I are best friends. I call him now what's amazing is we exchange advice. I may be calling him for advice, and then next thing you know, I'm coaching him on business or relationships and all that. And so it really helped me really kind of ground myself in this whole space of forgiveness. Although at 18, really didn't have a clue. I didn't know what it was. And then fast forward, I ended up getting married again and got divorced ultimately, and really went through a low point in life. And as I started dating again, actually got engaged and married again, then all of a sudden I find myself leaving Tennessee, moving to the Washington, D.C. area. Now my wife is pregnant with our son 2 years after we got there, which is the exact same time as my parents. And then when he was born, I questioned, like, can I be a good father? Do I know what it takes? Do I have all the skills that the knowledge that it takes to be a good dad? And then 9 months to the day he was born, literally just the day before he was turning 9 months, I was on a flight being transferred through work to the Midwest, to the Chicago area. So just like my father, at 9 months old, I was leaving my own son. But the difference was I went back to get my family. I went back, and now, that's been now almost 10 years later. My son is the biggest thing in my life, and my wife and I are enjoying marriage. But I realized throughout that process that there were so many things that I needed to learn around forgiveness and relationships, because I didn't want to have my son grow up like I did, wanting his dad to be there at his basketball games, wanting his dad to teach him how to ride a bike, wanting to have the conversations about tying ties and dating girls and all that stuff that young men would like to have the conversation with their dads with, but instead we had them with our moms. So that's what got me here. I'm an entrepreneur. I did corporate for many, many years, did nonprofit, and have a background in marketing, and graduated from Western Kentucky University with a degree in marketing, and then went on to Tennessee State and got an MBA. And eventually, as you said, I got a job here. They moved me to the DC area, and now we live outside of Chicago and love life. We actually own an insurance agency there, and I, of course, speak and write books and try to help people find, better ways to recreate relationships for themselves. So.
Wow, that's a good way great foundation to talk about building relationships. And I know we're going to talk about the book you wrote on terms of relationships. But also share with me about this pilgrimage of reconciling and what it means, how forgiveness opens up the doorway, and what have you learned through this pilgrimage of awakening, as what I would call it, in terms of how to bridge relationships and how to get past those hurdles and those things that stifles relationships and tear them apart. What is it that you've learned, and how do you apply that? How do you take the words off of your book and put it into application? So share it with me.
Well, the one thing I've really found about forgiveness, even in myself and relationships, the biggest hurdle that we run into in relationships is ourselves. The biggest hurdle is ourselves. We have egos, we have expectations of ourselves and of other people. And oftentimes we create these unimaginable obstacles for people. So you have an expectation of your wife or your husband, or, the partner that you have, that they have to do this. They have to live up. No, I'm sorry. They have a hurdle that's down here. You kind of set some low expectations of what you expect from them, but yet you set your own bar so high that you can never achieve it. And that, to me, is where I think we end up letting ourselves down, because we feel that we never live up to the standards that we set for ourselves in relationship. We question, we challenge, and we're always upset and quick to judge because we want to deflect as opposed to accept the role that we're playing. Now, the other challenge that we run into is we often don't communicate in the same language. We often bring baggage from our past relationships and even our childhood into relationships. And so again, as I've gone, I wrote my first book called Unconditional Forgiveness back in 2011. That was when I started the process. It was published in 2012. And as I went over the last several years just sharing this word about forgiveness and unconditional forgiveness, what seemed to happen over and over again were the conversations after the book signing, the conversations after the workshop, after the speaking engagement where I'm signing the book and I have someone walk up and say, you know, you said something to me today that made me let go of the pain that I've been holding on for the last 35 years with my ex-husband. Mm. And what people don't realize is that when you hold on to that pain, you're trying in many ways to hold on to that relationship. And oftentimes that relationship has been gone, but you are still holding on to the pain. And it only affects you. And so I always challenge people, as you said, from a practical application, by you not forgiving them, what impact has that had on your life? How does that show up in your life? How does that show up in the relationships that you have, not only with subsequent, spouses, boyfriend, girlfriend, but also the relationship you have with your children? How does it show up for you in the workplace? How does it show up for you with, relationships with people in authority, your church? Because again, we carry this baggage, and that baggage defines us in many ways. It defines who we are and our expectations of ourselves. And again, as I said, we start off here in relationships with where we set our expectations of ourselves. But then because we keep disappointing ourselves, we lower the expectations of others. Mm-hmm. And then we end up in those, again, repeat cycles of bad relationships because we're setting low expectations. We forgive them more than we forgive ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's the piece I really want to encourage your listeners to just focus in on, the fact that forgiveness is really not about you forgiving somebody else. Forgiveness, the real principle behind forgiveness is the fact that you're able to let go. You're forgiving yourself. You can't forgive somebody else if you haven't forgiven yourself. And once you've forgiven yourself for whatever piece you're carrying, whatever role you played in it, whatever guilt you carry, or for that matter, the anger, frustration, man, how did I get caught up like I did? Whatever that is, once you let go of that, it's much easier to look at that person and say, you know what, Jeff, man, I loved you. And now you're no longer part of my life, and I'm going to release you because of that. Mm-hmm. Because I'm finding my own happy again. That's when forgiveness really and truly works. That's when we show up, and we show up bright. We show up in full flavor. And that's, we were talking before the show started that, many of us, we wear the garments of our pain and our hurt. And oftentimes those that want to be in relationship with us, they never see who we really are. Mm. Because we wear masks, we wear fake clothes, and before you know it, by the time we're willing to take some of those things off, that person's so frustrated. That person's no longer interested in us. And what do we say? See, I knew it. I told you. All men are, women always, but that's because we never show up fully as who we are.
Wow, that's beautiful. When you were talking, I just thought about reflecting an image, and how you reflect an image. And many times people may look through two different glasses, like a window reflect glass. There's a glass and you're looking through, and then there's a mirror that gives off an image. Mm-hmm. Both are forms of glass, but only one gives an image. And we're so busy looking through the window of life and not reflecting and looking at ourselves from the inside out, and being able to see who we truly are. So what we do is we live our relationships vicariously, right? Through this window, what others are doing, what others' expectations are, but not starting from within. And so it's just amazing what God does when he asks men, where are you, right? After Adam putting on the clothing, as I shared with you before. And this state of awareness, when God raised the question, is not your state of physical place or a point in time. It's your state of mind.
Right.
Where are you? Your state of mind. And so I will tell you that many times men have a very difficult time through this process of dealing with emotions, dealing with those areas. Say, well, man, nah, brother, I ain't weak. I can't dive in that area. I'm going to keep this mask on, because it's the survival of the fittest. Right. And so share with me that process and that mentality of, particularly when men put on the mask as a sense of protection, and then also share what's the difference between forgiveness and forgetfulness. Because sometimes they says, well, how do I forgive, right? Because I'm still thinking about this, right? I forgive you, but I'm still, my actions, ain't gonna forget. So share with what's the difference there, because some don't know what the litmus test to know that I'm actually have forgive you.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Share something.
Well, first I have to tell you, this is absolutely God sent, because I just did a workshop not long ago, and I used your same analogy of glass. And I was challenging some business leaders to look differently at how they run their business, how they run organizations, because oftentimes they're looking at other people instead of looking at the role that they play. So that's how I know I was supposed to be in this chair tonight. This is amazing. So you ask a question about, I'll start off with the latter, the how do you know you've forgiven somebody? You hear so often people say, hey, I'm going to forgive and forget. No, I'm going to forgive, but I'll never forget. I'm going to hold you. You're holding people, and I'll give you an example of what someone shared with me when I went through my divorce that really made this make so much sense to me. When you talk about, you know what, this person hurt me, I'm never going to forget that. I'm going to hold them and every other man accountable to it. Someone challenged me one day as I was kind of ranting and raving about my life and how things didn't work out the way I had expected them to in my first marriage. And they looked at me and they said, well, let me ask you a question. What if you were going through Target and you walked up to the cash register after someone who had a basket full of things, and you sat down your candy bar and your soda, and when the cashier rang you up, they said, that's going to be $200. And you're like, but wait, I had a soda and a candy bar, and yes, they're much more expensive than they used to be, but it can't be $200. And the cashier says, yes, but you're paying for the person that came before you. We do that so often. We pay for the people that came before us. So when we go into a relationship, we're paying for whoever the person we're in a relationship with now, whatever mess they did, however they messed up that relationship, we're paying for that. And oftentimes we're charging others for the relationships that we had previously. So when you can let that stuff go, that candy bar and that soda is only going to cost you $5, because you know it's like $2.50 now for a candy bar. But when you can really, and the litmus test can be simple things like, if you don't hold contentment, you know, you're not constantly wishing ill thoughts. Obviously, you know, when we're being real, a lot of times you're like, you know, let's take Eddie Murphy, you know, they joked about, I want him to get hit by a bus, you know. When you're not having, we don't ever want that, but you know, when you're not having ill thoughts for that person, or better yet, when you can find yourself having the strength to pray for that person, and not for what they did wrong, but for their betterment. When you can walk into the same room with them and not feel like you need to run out the door. Now, I'm not saying that you stage these moments just to test yourself, but you know, you can find peace with yourself. And when you realize that you're no longer, you know, carrying that burden of pain with you, that's when you know you have forgiven them. Now, to the question about masks. So we were having a conversation earlier about men and emotions. You know, I tend to believe, as I look at my circle of guys, and I've got a broad array of men in my life that I've grown up with, or that I've gotten to know over the years as business leaders and so forth. And we run the gamut. But as I start really looking deeper, and especially as black men, the majority of us grew up with fathers not in our home. Many of us grew up with fathers not in the home. Many of my friends also grew up with fathers that were never at home. They were never involved, never engaged. And so what we often say is, obviously, you know, men grow up suppressing their emotions, they don't feel comfortable. I disagree with that to an extent, because as young men, we expressed our emotions. And I think our generation's parents didn't tell us to suck it up and be a man. They actually allowed us to show emotion, and they encouraged that. But I think what has happened over time is that some men, unfortunately, have been hurt because they showed their emotions in a relationship with someone who didn't see the vulnerability as a strength. And what we need to encourage is just that point, that being vulnerable in and of itself is a major, major strength. You know, it's real easy for me to walk around here and tell you, yeah, Jeff, I got it all together, you know, all my bills are paid, I'm living large. But for me to sit down and tell you some of my deepest, darkest challenges, and especially my emotions, my hurts, that's when I'm showing a level of strength that most men, I guess, are uncomfortable getting to. Now, how do we change that paradigm? I believe it starts with women, because oftentimes women have stopped men short of being that vulnerable. Because often women will say, I need a strong man. I need somebody that can take charge. And the second you have a bad day at work and you come home talking about, baby, I don't know, and if they don't walk into that moment of vulnerability with you in a way that's supportive and loving, you're not going to come back home and talk about your day at work. You're going to go downstairs to the basement, you're going to watch TV. And you're going to become the man with the mask. And guess what that does to your son? That teaches him not to show emotion. Guess what that does to your daughter? It tells her that the man that's in her life is not going to be around her. He's not going to spend time. He's not going to invest. He's not going to invest himself and be vulnerable with her. So we have to start, and I say women, and I'm not blaming women. This is not a window versus glass thing.
Yeah.
But I believe women have always been the linchpin for everything in the world. They are who births us into the earth. They are the first ones to nurture us. And the best thing they can nurture is vulnerability in men as a strength.
Wow. Talk about this clothing. I know that many times the word talks about putting on the garment of praise, and even the word talks about arming yourself with the full armor of God, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. And it talks about where you're able to stand, right? So you can stand and withstand. Not only just stand, but then withstand. Because it's a continuing standing, right? It's not just being there. And sometimes relationships starts off well, and then they begin to sort of fall apart. And part of that is many times what we wear in a relationship. I want to talk about this wearing because I know myself, I used to think that this material wearing of things was my significance. My value is in that, right? I remember in some of the most trying times in my marriage, what I would do is I would buy her things in order to cover up those hurts and those pains, versus spending time in the communion in a relationship with her, not giving her things, but giving her myself. And so those are things that I learned the wrong way, to try to clothe myself with stuff, with things, with abundance, right? Even the ministry, I would justify the ministry. I'll find in the word where the abundance and so forth, 100-fold return, but never taking off and being transparent so that the Spirit can move and touch the heart. So talk to me about this clothing, because that's drawing me in.
Absolutely.
Brother.
Well, first thing I'm going to say, there's a book, and it's called 5 Love Languages. And that is one that I encourage everyone that's in relationship to read, because you actually did some of the things. So there are 5 love languages. There's acts, acts. We're doing things of service, giving gifts, affection, touching, quality time, and I know I'm forgetting, validation, or words of affirmation. And so oftentimes we speak those love languages that we love ourselves, or those signs that show us love. So if you're buying your wife stuff, then you may feel loved if she's buying stuff for you. Versus in my case, and my wife is like, leave me alone, because I'll touch her 1,000 times, because when I'm having a bad day, I just want her to come and hug me, put her hand on my shoulder. But that being said, one thing that I often talk about when I'm speaking to people is we find validation in the wrong things. And this is going to get right to the heart of what we wear. For men, and especially those of us that are in middle class, communities, especially those that are not of color, as we're hustling, bustling in corporate America, validation is often in stuff. Validation is in the neighborhood, the car, the job. I can't tell you how often, you have to run the gamut of who you are, where you live, what university you graduated from, and whether or not you own a business. And that validates you in certain social settings. When I think of that as a man, That's not my validation. My validation is my relationship with God. Yeah, He created me, He's molding me, and each and every day I want to do more to be more like Him to people here on this earth so I can bring the kingdom of God here, as opposed to them waiting until they get to glory to see what it's like to have somebody love them in spite of what they've done, in spite of who they think they are. I want them to feel that love. I have the same issue with women as well. Validated, again, by relationships. And oftentimes those validations of relationship are shaped by who they think they should be married to. And I'm not going to go into titles, but you know what I'm saying, right. That there is a certain, I know some women, they have a list. They have certain criteria that has to be met in order for them to say, yes, this is the person that I'm supposed to be with. Well, what if they were validated by God as well? What if they knew that they were loved by God? In no greater way could a man ever love them the way God does. And if they had that relationship solidified, and then they found a man who was also validated by God, now all of a sudden we don't have to wear the clothes, because we can walk into a room and have the conversation. Yes, there was physical abuse, there was emotional, sexual abuse in my life, there was, whatever the baggage is that we bring into the relationships. Now all of a sudden that baggage becomes the testimony that we can now share as a couple to say, look, baby, you know how much baggage we unpacked together? And that's the story right now of my marriage. And like you said, we every day is not a beautiful day. But when we come out of that moment, we look back and we're like, wow, look at God. We had to go through that. We had to deal with that. Because if we hadn't dealt with that today, where would we be tomorrow? When the real struggle comes. You build this house on this rock, not on sand. And the rock is God.
Wow, that's beautiful. You've empowered me, and we got to go on. We're going to have a phase 2, and we're going to pick up on some of the things that we're just sharing about the heart and just the clothing we put on. And it is Christ, putting it on Christ, the mind of Christ, the aroma. The word talks about Christ as an aroma. I know that when I took my eyes off my wife and started putting it on Him, putting it on Christ, spending time with Him, I could live in fullness in Him, and then I can give myself as a living sacrifice. A sacrifice unto my wife, and to purify her, to nurture her, to present her, as the word talks about, as a glorified body. Like Christ presents the church as a glorified body. And so the only way you can do that is your union with the Father. And so that's what men need to hear. And brother, you've empowered us, man, by the last word of encouragement, man. Bring us home.
If I were to encourage anybody, anywhere, my encouragement is always forgive. Forgive and let go. Because there's power in forgiveness. Just like I said, there's power in being vulnerable. If you can find it in your heart to let go of whatever happened to you, you can bless so many more people with what's truly inside.
Wow. Stay focused.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Thank you.